Hey everybody, welcome back to another deck profile here on the Outcast Haven. Tonight I am joined by Jonathan Magnuson, fresh off a top 8 at the Calling in Orlando. John piloted Oldham to an incredible record, went to day 2 with him, and he has a really cool build of Oldhim, different from I think what we see out there normally. So we asked him to come on. He's a fellow Minnesotan. We've played some other games with him, and he always has had success as a deck builder and building unique things. So we really wanted to get his take on it and see his thoughts. So John, thanks for coming on and talking through your deck with us. First off, I would love to get your thoughts on why you chose Oldham. I know getting into the game, you're fairly new to the game, and Oldham is kind of like the deck that you chose to work on right out the gate, and it has been the deck that I have basically seen you play constantly. So what are your thoughts? Why did you choose Oldham as your deck?
Obviously entering the game right before Tales, so Tales releases. So, playing a new hero makes it easier to have all the comments. It's my first time buying lots of boxes for a set. So I was probably going to end up on one of those 3 heroes. And just looking at, Oldham's shield and the way he interacts with defense reactions had me really intrigued. And the most recent card game I've been playing is Runeterra. And one of the common themes in that game is that the person who acts first loses, because it's a priority system where if you spend all your mana first, your opponent can spend their mana knowing what you've already done with your turn. And I feel like playing a more defensive build kind of has that feeling to it, where I can see what threats you're throwing at my way. And if I can cover up your threats because I need to, then I'm going to do that. And I can make better choices about hey, he's only throwing a raw 8 damage at me, no on-hit effects. I'm just going to return a red Glacial Footsteps for 10. That's just better math. Whereas if you're running the deck with a bunch of 2 blocks, you kind of are forced into each turn going aggressive, regardless of whether their offense is better than you.
Yeah, and Oldham isn't really built to be... I mean, he has offensive tools, but he's definitely built to be kind of like that more reactive style where you kind of play to see what your opponent's doing, and then you return fire as necessary, or kind of just disrupt what they're doing and break them down. So at the Calling, you had... incredible success. Every time I came over to you, yep, I won again. Yep, I won again. We got the thumbs up, which is what you always want to see when you're checking on somebody. And so tell us a little bit about what you played and what your experiences were in your games.
Yeah, so day 1 of the Calling was all over the place. I started with a bye, opponent no-showed. Then went to Chain, whom I fatigued. Then went to a Dorinthia, to a Prism, to playing Dante in round 5. And he played a really good game. I kind of punted that game. It was kind of rough. I let him get through an extra 10 damage because I miscounted my resources. I was floating 1 resource and had a Staunch in hand, and if I had blocked slightly differently using armor instead of the shield, I would have had 2 to pay for Staunch on his end of turn. You strike for 7 with a red Electrify active. So that was one of those games where he was a great player and he made me work for my defense, and he just pushed through the damage. And then after that I played an Oldhim mirror somehow, and then to Reiner. So day 1 was all over the place. But I managed to squeak through with 6 and 1. My only I felt really good about the prior matchup, and I only faced one of them. And then it was Dante, and I lost that one. So it was kind of a weird day for me. It wasn't quite what I was expecting going into it. But then, yeah, the day 2 was much different. It started out round 1, Brendan Patrick. And that was another tough game, but I got him. I actually had a moment at the end of the game where I had Terrace basically forced him off of his hand. He passed back to me. And then I had nothing in my hand. I had 5 blues, including my arsenal. So I was just Crown of Seeds. And I drew the red Glacial Footsteps, and I was okay, 10 dominate, guess I win. So that was a feel good moment. And then from there on out, the rest of my games were, to be honest, kind of straightforward, easy, kind of what I expected. I played a Bravo and 2 Briars, and I destroyed every game. The Bravo game, I had a fused Oakenold into Pummel on top of it in the middle of the game, and from that gave me a massive HP lead. I feel really good about all those matchups. So
yeah. So you played Oldham into Oldham was kind of the deck that you like to play, and that's the deck you really been working on. But did you feel when Briar became kind of the meta that you that gave you like a little bit of a boost because inherently your deck has a natural ability to kind of fatigue threats. I think a lot of people, so like I'm a Guardian player, right? Like I play Bravo. That's basically my mainstay. And I think one of the misconceptions about Guardian sometimes is that we're always trying to just pure fatigue people and empty their deck. When in all reality, you're trying to kind of fatigue threats and just get through the stuff that really scares you and play to those turns where you can now be in control because what they're threatening you with isn't threatening. And I know you talked about that when you were playing some of those decks, you weren't necessarily trying to fatigue them, that you killed them all, right? Like you actually won the games with damage. But did you find that oftentimes you were able to kind of just churn through a lot of their threats? And I know you talk a lot about the second cycle, like that second time through the deck, your deck is just better than their deck. And is that how you found your success in like the Briar and Chain matchups?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, chain matchup, you're not really so much trying to kill them as like they're. I mean, it's just built fatigue. You know, Chain's milling his whole deck, so you kind of have to go fatigue there. But you still try to apply enough aggression that they can't just sit there with all their blood debt, taking blood debt, and then pile it all out on one turn. Briar is actually interesting. You could tell which Briars had lots of experience during maybe like the chain meta, playing into the decks that were trying to fatigue them, and they would like pitch stack and be really prepared for this longer game. And because Cheerios is a whole bunch of red and yellows anyways, their second cycle ends up being pretty strong. But the problem in those games for the Briar matchup is that second cycle they run out of armor blocks, and every time I swing an Ice Hammer, it's really rough for them.
Yeah.
And while I'm not trying to fatigue them, they're either going to die to damage or they're going to fatigue themselves blocking out Hammer. Because if I'm swinging Hammer for 4 and an Ice, if they try to block it out with 2 cards, they're just going to fatigue themselves that way. And if they take the 4 damage, then they're going to drop low enough such that Fused Oaken Old that you pitch stacked and followed up by a couple Dominates is going to just end it.
Yeah, it's interesting because their deck, by like what makes them powerful is kind of what makes them vulnerable, in that effectively most of their deck is a 2-block. So anytime you swing 4s and breakpoints at them with stuff, they kind of get in a situation where it's a lot harder for them to cover up damage than most decks.
Yeah, definitely. And they really hate that Ice. I actually, if I had known there was going to be this many Briars, I would have tried to fit a couple more Ice cards in there. But yeah, anytime you're swinging an Ice Hammer, they hate it.
Yeah. So let's go ahead and talk through the loadout. Obviously, we have Winter's Wail. That's the most common thing. I know some Oldhams kind of run Anathos as like a side option, but I don't know how that works because the deck runs a lot less of the 3-cost blue pitches that Bravo does. But I mean, Winter's Wail just seems good, especially in a format now where everybody wants to run things that are 0 cost. So with your equipment loadout, you've got basically Crater Fist is going in most games, right? When do you run Goliath Gauntlet in many matchups?
I basically run it for Prism, and I will run it into Dash. I found that into Prism, removing the prismatic shields is just more block anyways. So if you can go Goliath Gauntlet into CNC, and that extra 2 damage removes 2 shields, that's a big deal. So I just think that it's just a better option for that matchup, and I need any help I can get for the Prism matchup. My whole sideboard is for Prism, essentially.
I feel that as a Guardian, as a Bravo player. I feel like if Prism wasn't relevant, I would have about like 6 to 8 more slots in my deck that I could do literally anything with.
Yeah, and like one thing that like people might not quite catch is that like I don't really run Awakenings, but like Prism is so bad to the point that it's like just throw them in there. I'm going to be down in health. I need to kill people. So yeah, the Goliath Gauntlet is in there for the matchups where I can't reliably go late, and having 2 extra damage is better than having 3 block. Yeah, and then obviously Crown of Seeds is no brainer at this point. People have kind of figured out that card is insane for Oldhim. The ability to pitch stack exactly how you want to, get reds to a second cycle, and then win during that cycle of your deck is really powerful. And then I think the biggest thing is just Spring Tunic. I joined the game right before Tails, so I feel like I approached Oldhim kind of from like not a Guardian perspective, but like a new player perspective. And the biggest thing is if you're gonna run Tectonic, I feel like you need Anothos, because Anothos makes Tectonic work. They fit hand in hand. Where if you're pitching to create a Seismic Surge and then you're swinging your weapon, Anothos you're swinging for 6 there, and it's 2 cards for 6 damage, which is okay-ish math. That's right on par. But then you're saving a resource. Whereas if you're pitching to create a Seismic Surge and then you're swinging Winter's Wail for 4, the math on that is kind of atrocious. Because you're using at least 2 cards to get 4 damage, which is just not where you wanted to be at. So I just felt like there wasn't as much inherent value in Tectonic beyond just the 3 block. My list ends up running none of the breakpoints at like 4 or whatever. It's just 6 or 3, so that ends up being irrelevant as well. I know that I could have ended up running Endless Winters, but I kind of moved away from them because I wasn't running Tectonic. And then Tunic ends up just being more block over the course of the game, because every time you get a resource, you're paying for seeds or you're paying for a shield off of it. And that can easily add up to 6 or 7 block over the course of the game. So I was like, well, mathematically, this card is just going to do more work for me. I don't have a Nothos, so I'm not going to get good value out of the surges. So I just, went that way.
Yeah, I know that Tectonic is an interesting choice too, because to your point, the biggest thing that stuck out to me is that when you look at a lot of the Oldhim lists, you realize that they don't, to your point, don't have the breakpoint. Like, they're not running like 4 and 7 cost cards that are Guardian related, so it kind of serves no purpose to make a surge other than just to make a surge because you're bored almost. You're realistically, most of your cards cost 6s and 3s. Sometimes I think you run Disable, which is a 5, so but even then that doesn't matter. It's still going to cost you 2 cards if it's 4 now. And the only reason in Bravo you make the surge for something like a 5 cost is so you can pay for Bravo's Dominate effect, which again you don't have access to. So you're kind of like running into this place where Tectonic isn't super synergistic with the deck. And I think that a lot of what you said is really interesting to me, is that as a new player, you kind of had a different perspective on Guardian, where all of us, old dogs that have been running Bravo for forever, we're trying to figure out how to build Oldhim, and none of us could figure it out because we're so used to playing Bravo math and Bravo cards. So seeing that the perspective of somebody else has been really good, and watching Spring Tunic actually was something that I ended up playing more in my Oldhim when I was testing him and playing with him, and I was like, this resource to run Crown of Seeds and play into a 5-card hand when someone does something that either threatens your arsenal or you just don't have anything else, they pass, and then you just go, cool, Seeds away this card that I put in my arsenal because I didn't really need it, but it was the last card in my hand. Now I have 5 cards and I can basically do whatever I want. Is a really unique interaction that Tunic gives you that you don't get with Crown of Seeds and Tectonic or any other chess piece.
Yeah, and along those lines, there's one other thing that comes up a lot, is that people are used to seeing, they're floating 2 resources and have a card. I have to think about Pummel into Guardian.
Yep.
If you're floating 1 resource because you just pitched a blue to CNC, and they don't look at your Tunic and realize you have a Tunic resource, you will burn them so many times just being like, wait, Tunic? Pummel? And they'll just look at you like, right, you do run Tunic. So I've gotten a couple people with that one.
Yeah. So let's go through like what your attack action loadout looks like in this deck. Obviously, CNC is just CNC. You run Oaken Old, you run Glacial Footsteps on a 9 of, but you don't. You mentioned it earlier. You don't run Endless Winter. Is that just because your deck is not ice focused, or because of the cost curve of it?
I think it's mainly the cost and like when I want to actually attack in a game. I also don't run Spinal Crush, and I think some people might think that's insane. Biggest thing for me is that I don't want to swing big attacks early in the game unless my opponent did nothing. And then I want to be like, well, I guess I'll just vomit out some damage. So if I'm blocking with 3 cards and swinging Hammer, I'm trying to ping them down low enough that I can, come in with an Oaken Old and then put them low. And then at the end of the game, I don't want them to be able to block out what few red attacks I got to the bottom of my pitch, because even though I'm running theoretically 9 Glacials, and 3 Oaken Olds, I'm going to have to block with some of those on the first cycle and only get a few of them for the second cycle. And I need those aggressive cards in the second cycle to come in with Dominate so that I can end the game reliably. So because I'm not trying to swing a big attack anytime in the middle of the game, unless it's like a CNC, I just want my late game threats to have Dominate on them so that when I choose to take the damage and go from like 15 health to 7 health against a Briar, which is very dangerous, I want to know that my attack is going to kill them.
Mm-hmm. It's also interesting because Endless Winter is one of those cards that at face value seems really crazy, but in all actuality, there's a lot of decks that it kind of doesn't do anything to because it's activated abilities. So if somebody just vomits cards out like Briar, it really doesn't do anything to them unless they decide they're going to make a Rune Chant off of the grasp, and they can just choose to not do that, and they swing their weapon last, so they get the Frostbite at the very end of their turn, and then just pass and it falls off. So it becomes one of those cards that seems like maybe it makes a resurgence in a different meta, but in the current meta, it also seems like a card that inherently doesn't have a ton of value because the meta doesn't demand that it has value.
Yeah, and you definitely want Tectonic with any 4 breakpoint,
Yeah.
so you can come in for 8 with 2 cards. Not running Tectonic means that when I did run Endless Winter, the only times I was throwing it at people is when I had a Tunic Resource available.
Yeah, which makes it kind of clunky. So you have 1 Earth and 1 Winter card here. Are you relying pretty heavily on your pitch stacking to line up your Oak and Olds? Because I know a lot of Oldham lists are very heavy on the like Earth and like the Earth and Ice cards specific, so they can line up Oak and Olds kind of easily. But I know that you talk about being really focused on setting up those pitches so that way your second cycle reliably hits Okens and being able to fuse them.
Yeah, I think that the more I played the deck, the more I hated the elemental cards, because just cards that block 2 feel so bad in a game plan that's trying to get to your second cycle. So it was basically like, well, keep all of the elemental cards or all of the Earth or Ice cards that block 3, and then try to fit in a few others that are going to have some use, and then they can activate either the Hammer or the Earth reaction. So I'm on like 10 Earth and 11 Ice. And I found that, it was just enough that like when I needed an Earth reaction, I had it. When I wanted to swing Hammer with Ice, I could usually do it. As I said earlier, if I'd known there were going to be this many Cheerios Briars, I probably would have fitted a couple extra like blue ice cards for the whale. But I think that in general, this is probably the best balanced list that you're going to find for Oldham, where you're just trying to be generically good against everything.
Yeah, which I think is kind of, as the meta shifts a little bit, you'll probably see a little bit more of that. And I think Oldham is one of those classic examples of a deck that's very, very player and pilot focused in terms of how you want to build the deck. Like if you want to be more defensive, I think your build is a really good version of it. And honestly, in the current meta, playing Guardian aggressive is a pretty dangerous life to live because Guardian requires a lot of cards a lot of times to do the things that they want to do. So you're absorbing a lot of damage, and sometimes the payoff in return is not very good. So let's move down. Your attack reactions in true Guardian fashion, pummel, because it's the best attack reaction in the game. Discard a card, add some damage, and beat people up with it. And when your cards are already discarding cards or causing problems, they makes them even better. So why did you go with 6 and not just like a standard 3 reds you see a lot of times?
Primarily because I just needed a way to beat Prisms and Swiss. So I wasn't counting on being able to beat Prism in like top 8 games or whatever. I was like, well, if I roll that matchup, I'll lose. But into like a Swiss Prism, I needed a way to catch them off guard and remove their prismatic shields. Oldham can handle their auras for days. All of my sideboard, the 6 pummels, the 3 awakenings is just against Prism. I need to be able to deal enough damage to kill the prismatic shield. So if I can come in with the CNC for 6 and then pummel on top of it, maybe they math out wrong. I come in with just like a hammer swing and they block up 3 of it, figuring they'll lose 1 shield and keep like 4. If I can pummel that, it's a huge tempo swing in my favor. Beyond the Prism matchup, you'll run it into like Dash and like Rhinar decks where you have to go aggressive, and then you'll run like 1 or 2 yellow pummels into everything else. The yellow pummel being best because you can pitch it to activate Crown and Shield and essentially block 2 with it while still moving it to second cycle. Because you don't really want to play it on first cycle because once again, first cycle you're just swinging hammer, so you just want to get that to second cycle, maybe have it come up next to an Okanold that you're fusing, and then that's just going to completely swing the game when you rip 3 cards from their hand and deal like 12 damage.
Yeah, so that's all of your attacks, that's all of your aggression. Let's go to your defense reactions and talk about your loadout there. I know you love Turn Timber. That's something that you really like as a card. It's really close to on par with like the Staunch Response curve, but then it doesn't require the double pitch. It just requires the Earth Fusion, which I know you have enough cards. Like you said 10 or 11 Earth cards in the deck to be able to pull that off. So you can pretty consistently get that extra buff on those. And then Sinks, Pulse, and you run one Fate. Is that just a math thing because it's just an extra Fate, or is that you just like the extra 4?
I just couldn't fit the Fate for scenes. I would run 3 of them if I could, but because you don't really want D reacts into Prism, I just couldn't fit all of them, so I had to cut something.
That's fair.
Yeah, and I really like the 2 cost defense reactions in Oldhim because it floats that 3rd resource for shield, which means, Sink Below is generically one of your cards is defending for 4. That's really good math. With Staunch Response, you're making 2 cards defend for 8 total because you're getting the 7 and you're getting the 1 from shield, but you can split it up so that 1 goes to like a next attack. And even though there are lots of wide decks, all the wide decks run Plunder Run, so the Staunches and the Turn Timbers just are so good into that, where they can convert 2 cards in your hand into really strong defensive values.
Yeah,
kind of just math your way to victory.
Yeah, we've talked about that with a couple of the other guys locally with the Guardians. Is that like Red Staunch is actually a card that fits in a really good spot as far as the math goes. Because to your point, like the Cheerios Briar deck loves 4 breakpoint cards, and they love to pair them with red plunder runs, so it hits them right at 7. And you basically demand that they have some way to buff it over that 7 to get the draw on that first one, which is great because you want to push them farther down the line before they see any more cards. So being able to cover it up with 1 card pitched in that, and then to your point, having the extra resource to hit your shield or do something else with it is a really good. Do you feel like Turn Timber is something that just stays at 6 for sure? Do you like to? Are you going to play with any of the defense reactions, or are you happy with your loadout right now?
I think at most you could cut a couple of the blue Staunch responses. I like blue Turn Timber because you're pitching them early, and then in a late game you're going to have the earths because you're just at a higher density of earth cards at that point. So it's basically blue that defends for 6 or 7 once you include the shield block. So that's above average defense value with a blue. Staunch is still great. I find that I just destroy the Bravo matchup because I just can cover up damage better than they can. I choose when damage is dealt in the game, and the blues really help in that. But I think the blues end up being a little bit worse into these super go wide decks where I would prefer to just have 3 blocks early in the game. So I could see, or just more ice cards. So I could see switching out a couple staunches for the ice.
Nice. So for your non-attack actions, we have my favorite non-attack action that we got in Tails, which is Terra Sunder. But then probably the most annoying one as well, Channel Lake Frigid. What was your thought process behind which ones you chose for the earth and the ice, and how you kind of came with the ratios that you came with for these non-attacks?
Yeah, I think the main thing is for the blues in my deck, I'm looking for either raw aggression or they need to be earth or ice. So Terra Sunder offers aggression in late game. Oldhim struggles with being able to present threats in the same way that Bravo does. Mm-hmm. So I need some threats from the hands where I just don't draw a red. Terra Sunder helps with that. And then when it comes to the other non-attack actions, they're kind of just the best thing I can choose in the element. Polar Blast, very rarely does it actually end up mattering, but it cycles and it's a blue ice. So tomorrow, I can tuck a couple extra Oakenolds into the really long matchups. Channel Lake Frigid, while I don't have as many ice, so it's not quite as strong for me, it's still really strong in matchups like Chain to Arsenal it, and then right before they had Shackle 6 or whatever, toss that out there. So yeah, it's really just trying to find what are, I really hate the elemental cards, to be honest. It's what are the best options I have, and just throw those in there. Usually sticking to the non-attack actions in case I run into a Bolton.
Yeah, I think that's a high value play, is to have access to them in the Bolton matchup, but also the Sotomaro I like a lot, being able to just cycle back Oakenolds and kind of giving you an option to do that and recur it. It's an arsenal card that if you don't have to crown it away, you actually feel good about playing. Sometimes in Oldham, I think one of the benefits of Oldham that can become a crutch, you see with people, is they just arsenal any card because they know they can crown it away, but then it can kind of screw up their pitch stacking or not offer value if they actually keep access to it. Channel is such a good card right now just because it offers you some value when you, to your point, have to arsenal it, and you can arsenal it and then just kind of hang on to it until that turn that you really need it, and it gives you some access to that. When with your instance, I know you said you only put Awakening in for Prism. Blizzard, do you like it at a 2 of, or do you think Blizzard would be something you'd go up to 3 of at any point?
I considered it. I really just don't like the fact that it doesn't block, and I
Mm-hmm.
don't like the way that uh, you kind of it doesn't have very much inherent value because you're either playing it early and your opponent gets to like know that you're going to play that, and they can like choose like to pay for it, and then you're just usually like trading for a card or a card for maybe two cards if they don't have a yellow. And if you're playing it late to like maybe stop a Briar from pitching to swing sword, which is still like in theory blocking for it, the card that they would have pitched just goes to their arsenal. So
Yeah.
I never felt like it was like that great of a card, but it is blue ice that has some really strong matchups into like something like Combo Bolton or a Prism where like they block out your attack and then they pitch one yellow to create a shield and swing a bunch and then you're like, I'll stop 10 damage.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm not super happy with the card. I just feel like it never plays quite as well as you expect it to, but it made the cut.
Yeah. It's kind of like that classic card that every deck or every archetype has that you're like it every time I think about this card, it should be good. Every time I play this card, I'm underwhelmed. But when it's good, it can be crazy good. But then when it's bad, it's crazy bad. So it has that incredibly high ceiling but incredibly low floor, where it can save you a ton of spectral damage, like shield pokes from Prism, but can also get you killed in some matchups where you just know they have the resources. So it always strikes me as odd in that sense. But what are your thoughts after the calling about potential changes to the deck or how you could see it being adjusted if Briar, gets kind of pushed aside and something else rises? Are there things that you would want to do to change it, or are you pretty happy with where the list is?
I'm pretty happy with the list. Obviously, going 10-1 in Swiss is it's like a good reflection on the deck. So it's like I think it's pretty much there as far as like just having a generic deck that's good into everything and has a sideboard that can help you handle Prism.
Mm-hmm.
I think that if you are counting on seeing more like continuation of like way more Briars, way more chains, then you see like more ice go in. Um, but if not, I'm pretty happy with how the list is working out right now. I feel like the ratios are pretty decent. You're going to be able to fuse your cards when you need to. You have enough defense to make it to second cycle. I would really like to be able to remove a lot of my sideboards and like just not care about Prism, but can't do that. So
Yeah. Not planning for Prism is planning to fail. It feels like as soon as you take out a couple Prism cards, that's when you'll just line them up like one after the next in Swiss at some random things. So, is there anybody you want to say thanks to, shout out?
yeah, I guess I'd just shout out Andrew Rothermel and Michael Berg, just a couple locals who put up with me constantly testing Oldhim into them. It's one of those things where Berg was playing Katsu, and I think one day he had school off for whatever reason. I had the day off from work, and we just met up at a store and we played for like 6 hours. And it's like one of those things where it's like he didn't take a single win on Katsu against Oldhim. It's just like brutal playtesting sessions. Andrew was the same thing. He was running like Lexi, and he just couldn't take games off of me. And it's like they really put up with having to deal with getting blocked out for an eternity. So I do thank them for all that practice. It helped. I mean, obviously it wasn't Briar practice, but it helps just anytime you're practicing into an aggro deck.
Yeah, games are games sometimes. Like just being able to know your deck there's so much value to that. So, well, thanks for coming on. Thanks for sharing your deck with us and letting everybody see it, giving your thoughts and tech on it. We appreciate you coming on. Congrats again on your incredible success. And that was your first big tournament, right? That was your first time out to something big at a national level, like that high competitive fab level. So congrats on that. Congrats on it turning into an awesome ELO rating right out the gate for you. I know you shot up that ELO board like no other. So
yeah, I was pretty happy about that. Not gonna
lie. It feels good, right? In this game, you get there's like a real defined level of success that you get where it's not everybody talking about it, but you're like, it's on the website. It's pretty easy to track. So congrats.
Yeah, I was expecting something good from the 10-1. I wasn't quite expecting that.
Yeah, well, there you go. You got rewarded for it. You got rewarded for your grinding and your commitment to Oldham. So Thanks again for coming on, everybody. Thanks for watching. We appreciate it. If you have comments or questions, throw them in the comments. I can pass them on to John, and maybe he can answer them in the comments for you if you have something that you're interested in. We'll make sure we try and throw a link so you can kind of see the deck and get it other than just like the quick scroll through. And don't forget, like and subscribe, and we will see you next time, guys. Thanks.